Feast your eyes on this. Photographs of Trump's prepared remarks appear to show that Trump crossed out a line about bringing the election back hackers to justice. And then he added a line, you can see it written in there in Sharpie, denying collusion. Trump's attempt at controlling the damage today came after he defended his shocking performance with Putin, saying on Twitter this morning, quote, "While I had a great meeting with NATO, I had an even better meeting with Vladimir Putin of Russia. Sadly, it is not being reported that way. The fake news is going crazy." But the outpouring of reaction from across the political spectrum speaks for itself. Here goes.
His smartest, most loyal aides and his smartest, most trusted advisors that are super loyal to him have got to get to him right now and say, listen, this is a grave mistake.
I think it was a bad day for the president. I think he can fix it.
The president seems to give credence to Vladimir Putin's assurances over the findings of the Senate, the House, and our intel agencies, Dan Coates, and that's not good.
And to do that on a world stage was, for me, indefensible.
He should have defended us. He should have defended his own intelligence community.
His behavior in that press conference was un-American, outrageous, ridiculous, stupid.
Trump made a mockery of the U.S. presidency today. He made a mockery of our country and our shared values today.
I think President Trump, was wrong yesterday in a major way, and I think it was a very embarrassing press conference.
It was probably the low point of the presidency so far.
It's the musings of an imbecile. Vladimir Putin looks across to the other podium, and what he sees standing there is a fool.
It feels like the dam is breaking, and that, people are, I was really glad to see people on both sides of the aisle condemning what happened yesterday strongly.
Joining me right now is Ashley Parker, White House reporter for The Washington Post. Michael Steele's former chair of the Republican National Committee. Malcolm Nance is MSNBC national security analyst. Ashley, after months of defending the president, saying he didn't collude with the Russians, he looked like he was colluding yesterday. My question, who told him to change his tone today?
A number of people told him to change his tone today. You had Mike Pompeo pushing him. We understand Chief of Staff John Kelly was pushing him. I know MSNBC reported Vice President Mike Pence. There was a little bit of a lag at first from the White House, I have to say, because they were kind of frozen, getting no clarity from the top, because they first didn't understand if the president did, in fact, want to do some damage control or if he wanted to double down. But there was an effort to push him there, and that's what you saw today, him kind of begrudgingly, haltingly reading from that sheet something closer to what his aides wanted him to express.
Who came up with that Mickey Mouse spin of his about wooden and wood? Who came up with that one? That's pretty weak stuff. I've watched this in politicians for 30 or 40 years. It's called spin. It's a one step. You admit you made a mistake, and while people are believing you, in those few seconds they believe you because you seem like you're being honest, you lie again. Who taught him to do that one?
So I don't actually know who came up with the double negative defense, but I can tell you that a senior White House official did say these are the president's words, even though we have heard that other people helped massage and shape that statement. If you believe the White House's top line spin was the president's words, so in theory, he came up with that.
Yeah, right. I mean, let's go. I understand that's what they would put out. Michael, what do you make of this? Because it seems like, and I want to reiterate this, we've been arguing this back and forth from the White House. Oh, I didn't have anything to do with the Russians. I'm all my own, except I completely, utterly, I'm willing to say anything they want and repeat it like a parrot. One of the new editorial pages today had him as a parrot, the President of the United States. Why? Let me just ask it. Do you think he covered himself at all? Did any damage control or look more like a double downer? Your thoughts?
Oh, no. This was there's no coverage here at all, Chris. This was an attempt at double downing because it was written all over the president's face. His body language told everyone who was watching this he didn't want to say it. He didn't believe what he was saying. He didn't want to be in that space because he'd already told us what he already thought. And for all the clips that you played of my friends and colleagues in the Republican Party who are now somewhat upset about this. Why? The president's been saying very clearly from day one he does not trust, nor want to have anything to do with our intelligence community. So this is nothing different. This is nothing new. The only difference, Chris, is that he said it standing next to Putin. And in that stark moment, it became real that this president and this Putin guy, this soulmate that he seems to have an affinity for, has something far beyond what the Republican Party ever thought possible. So let's stop the surprise here. There's no no real new news here other than just actually seeing with our eyes what we've already heard out of the president's mouth for the last 18 months.
Malcolm, jump on this because I think here's something. I would like to pay attention to the secondary characteristics. I like to watch how people move, what they're doing with their arms or hands, whatever. I got the sense that Putin was in heaven yesterday, that he had a guy with him under his captivity. He was smirking as if he owned the guy. And I watched Trump. I don't know what he was like. Trump seemed to be, unfortunately, comfortable in the role of captive. I don't know how to explain it. You're the expert.
Well, it's not Stockholm Syndrome. Let me tell you, I can tell you Vladimir Putin is a human intelligence officer. He is a person who manipulated people to betray their country, to go from East Germany into West Germany, to steal technology as a member of the KGB. He is a former communist, brought up that way throughout his life, and is now the president of Russia. The only thing that I didn't see yesterday was exactly how Putin could not move his fingers and make Donald Trump marionette around the stage, because that's what I saw. We saw a man who was being handled, and that's a professional term. And I think we can start using that term a little less rhetorically now. I don't think that Donald Trump did anything more than express the admiration and love and bromance that he has for Vladimir Putin, that he has told us for years now that he has. The problem here is that he came off as not the president of the United States, but as a representative of the Russian Federation, almost like a Russian vice president. And John Brennan, the CIA director, who I admire greatly, used the word treasonous. I don't think we should use that term, but we can use alternate loyalty.
Yeah, well, I couldn't believe it. I'll get later in the show. I'll get to it. But for Putin, a communist all his life, to dare talk about Lee Harvey Oswald killing Kennedy as if they didn't have anything to do with it. An extraordinary thing to bring up a communist shooting of an American president.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.